Hello, and this is my presentation for Nadel versus Burger King. My name is Darwin Fontanares, and this is for Management 520. First question is, what court decided the case in the assignment? The answer is the Court of Appeals, Ohio, 1st District, Hamilton County. According to the case, what must a party establish to prevail on a motion for summary judgment? In order to prevail on a motion for summary judgment, a movement has the burden to demonstrate that no genuine issue of material fact remains to be litigated, that it is entitled to judgment as a matter of law, and that it appears from the evidence, when viewed most strongly in favor of the non-moving party, that reasonable minds can come to but one conclusion, and that conclusion is adverse to the non-moving party. Where a moving party is seeking summary judgment on the basis that a non-moving party cannot prove its case, the moving party bears the initial burden of informing the trial court of the basis for the motion, and identifying those portions of the record which demonstrate the absence of a genuine issue of material fact on an essential element of the non-moving party's claim by specifically pointing to some evidence of the type listed, in which affirmatively demonstrates that the non-moving party has no evidence to support its claim. Once this burden is met, the non-moving party must then produce evidence on the issues for which it bears the burden at trial by setting forth specific facts by the means listed in Civil Rule 56, demonstrating the existence of a triable issue of fact. Briefly state the facts of this case using the information found in the case in LexisNexis. Nadel was driving his kids to school. His son Christopher was in front of the seat next to him. Nadel's mother, Evelyn, was a passenger on the other side. They stopped at Burger King and received 2 cups of coffee fitted with lids and placed in a cardboard drink container, which was handed to Evelyn. Somehow, as Nadel drove away, the coffee got spilt on Christopher, who suffered 7 second-degree burns on his right foot. Nadel sued for breach of warranty of merchantability, breach of a warranty of fitness for a particular purpose. The coffee was too hot, design defect, and there was a failure to warn. Burger King moved for summary judgment because Nadel admitted he knew the coffee was hot. Nadel replied that 175 degrees is known to be too hot to be safe. Burger King was granted summary judgment. Nadel appealed. According to the case, why was this not a case of negligent infliction of emotional distress, and what tort did the court approve? Negligent infliction of emotional distress is a claim based upon the negligence of one party creating actionable emotional distress in another. In Poe v. Hanks, 1983, the Ohio Supreme Court stated in paragraph 3 of the syllabus, where a bystander to an accident states a cause of action for negligent infliction of serious emotional distress, the emotional injury sustained must be found to be both serious and reasonably foreseeable in order to allow a recovery. Serious emotional distress describes emotional injury which is both severe and debilitating. Thus, serious emotional distress may be found where a reasonable person, normally constituted, would be unable to cope adequately with the mental distress engendered by the circumstances of the case. Here, Evelyn and Paul Nadel, Christopher's grandmother and father respectively, are the ones making claims for negligent emotional distress. Yet the only evidence of any emotional distress as a result of the incident is, number 1, Evelyn's statement that she was worried, though not enough to seek psychological treatment, and number 2, Paul's statement that while receiving psychological treatment for depression resulting from his divorce and stress, the incident came up, although it was not a contributing reason for seeking or receiving counseling. Absent from the record is any showing of the type of emotional distress where a reasonable person, normally constituted, would be unable to cope adequately with the mental distress engendered by the circumstances of the case. Therefore, the trial court properly granted summary judgment with respect to this claim. According to the case, why didn't the court approve summary judgment for product liability claims? Improperly granted summary judgment to the defendants on products liability claims of design defect and failure to warn because genuine issues of material fact remain whether the coffee was so hot that its risks outweighed its benefits under Rule 2307.75, whether the coffee was so hot that it was not as safe as an ordinary consumer would expect under Rule 2307.75, and whether the risk of a second degree burns was an unforeseen danger that required a warning under Rule 2307.76a. Do you agree with this decision? Why or why not? Well, I feel that the summary judgment was properly entered against the Nadels on their failure to warn claim because the fact that coffee is hot and can cause burns is open and obvious. The evidence demonstrates that Evelyn and Paul knew the coffee was hot and that they had ordered it hot. In fact, coffee is usually served hot and allowed to cool before consumption. Rule 2307.76b provides that a product is not defective due to lack of warning as a result of the failure to warn about an open and obvious risk or a risk that is a matter of common knowledge. A knife may cause various degrees of injury ranging from the mere slicing of skin to the severing of a limb. However, the fact that the injury is a severing of a limb does not make the risk of causing some type of cutting any less obvious. Likewise, coffee is served hot. The fact that its heat may cause a slight burn in some instances, or second-degree burns when, like in this case, the coffee is spilled and compressed between a child's sock and his skin for a period of time, does not make less obvious the risk that hot coffee purchased for consumption will burn upon contact with the skin. I would conclude that the coffee is an open and obvious risk which requires no warning. Now, one of the cases which have used Nadel versus Burger King as a precedent since its publication is Stephen Oliver versus Heavenly Bagels Incorporated. The citation number is 189 Miss 2D 125 729 NYS 2D 611 2001 NY. The name of the court which decided the case is the Supreme Court of New York in Nassau County. The year of the decision was July 26, 2001. The facts of the case are that the plaintiff customer sued defendants, a restaurant, the manufacturer of a coffee machine, and the supplier of the machine, seeking to recover for damages sustained when the customer was burned by spilled coffee. Defendants moved and cross-moved for summary judgment, seeking to dismiss the complaint and all cross-claims against them. The issue of the case was that the defendants argued that no defect in the manufacture or maintenance of the coffee machine was shown, and that defendants had no duty to warn the customer of the dangers of hot coffee. A service document showed that the brewing temperature was 194 degrees, and the industry standards require a brewing temperature of 200 degrees, plus or minus 5 degrees. The decision of the case was that In a personal injury action in which the plaintiff was burned when scalding coffee splashed on him, defendants are entitled to summary judgment dismissing the complaint. Because the hotness of coffee is such an essential and intended attribute of the product, a defendant has a duty to warn of its temperature only if it exceeds the reasonable range of temperature for such product. As there was no evidence that the coffee was hotter than contemplated by the plaintiff, there was no duty to warn. The record contains evidence that the temperature range recommended by the coffee industry for brewing coffee is a temperature that will cause second-degree burns. Coffee is served hot, and the fact that its heat may cause second-degree burns does not make it less obvious the risk that hot coffee purchased for consumption will burn upon contact with skin. Therefore, no warning is required. Accordingly, the plaintiff has failed to provide evidence from which a jury could conclude that the subject coffee was unreasonably hot. That it caused second-degree burns does not suffice. Consequently, there is no factual basis for a conclusion that the coffee was defective. What was the principle of law the case was used for in this case? New York precedent on the issue of scalding coffee that caused first and second degree burns provides that the fact that the coffee was not hot enough to cause injury, if not properly handled, does not mean that it was defective or negligently served. Where a product by its very nature has a dangerous attribute, liability is imposed only when the product has an attribute not reasonably contemplated by the purchaser or is unreasonably dangerous for its intended use. Because the hotness of coffee is such an essential and intended attribute of the product, defendants have a duty to warn of its temperature only if it exceeds the reasonable range of temperature for such a product.